Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, OER and Dual Enrollment, Leveraging Open Educational Resources to Expand Equitable Access, brought to you by the Midwestern Higher Education Compact and the Southern Regional Education Board. We are waiting a couple more minutes for the rest of our folks to log on. So in the meantime, I will remind everyone that we will record this webinar and it will be posted to both the SREB and the MEC websites in the coming days. You'll get all of that information in a follow-up email, which you will receive tomorrow. I will also remind folks that we have a Q&A feature that is at the bottom of your screen. Please use that to ask questions during the webinar, and we will monitor those and answer those as quickly as we can. I think that might be everything you need to know at this point. I'll be with you shortly. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, OER and Dual Enrollment, Leveraging Open Educational Resources to Expand Educational Equity, brought to you today by the Midwestern Higher Education Compact and the Southern Regional Education Board. I will remind everyone that we will record this webinar and that it will be featured on the MEC and SREB websites in the coming days. Tomorrow you will receive an email that will provide you with the links and the information you need to access it in the future. I'll also remind everyone that there's a Q&A feature in Zoom. You can look at the bottom of your screen. That's where we would love for you to put any of your comments or your questions during the webinar, and we will respond to them as quickly as we possibly can. So let's get started. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit of an idea of what's going to happen today. I am Jenny Parks, the Vice President for Policy and Research at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers, the first one being Charlotte Daly, who is joining us from the Southern Regional Education Board. Charlotte is a program specialist for open educational resources. And then after Charlotte and I have provided you with the background for this study and why we hired Jennifer Zinth to do this research, I will introduce you to our main presenter and the author of the paper that accompanies this webinar, Jennifer Zinth, founder and principal of Zinth Consulting. She will be interviewing two case studies, two folks who have done the work of beginning to and continuing to use open educational resources in their dual and concurrent enrollment programs. The first will be Paul Preimesberger from Central Lakes College in Minnesota. Paul's title is Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Success. And our next story will then be from Zachary Adams, who works for the Tennessee Board of Regents. He is the Director of Postsecondary Coordination and Alignment. And after we've had all of these presentations, we will open it up for a Q&A and discussion. Next, please. As I said, I'm Jenny Parks, Vice President of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Next slide, please. This work is part of a larger set of initiatives in which MEC has been engaged for the last year and will continue to be engaged in for the next 6 months. We have joined partners with the other regional compacts, the Southern Regional Education Board being one of those, and we have created the National Consortium for Open Educational Resources. That consortium is one under which we collaborate to do certain types of promotion of OER resources, and we do this under a Hewlett Foundation grant that we have received for 18 months. The outcomes that we are looking for in our grant are outlined here. You don't have to read them in any specificity at this time, but when you do have the slides from the webinar, you'll be able to refer to them in the future. One of the things you will note in this and some of the other materials is that each of the compacts has to pursue a research project in connection with our open educational resource work. Next, please. This is a summary of the activities that we are using at MEC to achieve these outcomes under the Hewlett grant and under the NCOER work. And like I said, specifically, we have 2 research projects at MEC, one of which involves dual enrollment and OER. And that is in collaboration with SREB. That is their main research project. So again, it is part of a suite of activities in which we are engaged. Next, please. Well, I'm going to introduce Charlotte Daly now, the program specialist for open educational resources at the Southern Regional Education Board. And she can give you a little bit more background on the research with dual enrollment and OER, because they are doing much more with it at SRIB than we are at MEC. We're glad that they let us kind of piggyback and tag along in this, because it's really important to our stakeholders in the Midwest as well. Charlotte?
Thank you, Jenny. Again, I'm Charlotte Daly, Program Specialist for Open Educational Resources at the Southern Regional Education Board. Next slide, please. SRAB's outcome and focus area for this specific funding initiative from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation is to scale adoption of high-quality open educational resources in the states and throughout our region, with emphasis on dual enrollment and career technical education pathways. Again, I'd like to mention something that Jenny said. There is a really big dual enrollment initiative already in place in the Office of School Enrollment within SREB that's led by Dale Winkler and Tim Shaughnessy. However, for the purpose of this funding initiative, it lies within the Office of Postsecondary Education, where we focus on the move from high school into postsecondary education. Next slide, please. The activities and deliverables from SREB are listed here. Please read them at your leisure. But for the purpose of this webinar today, the two that are bolded: develop publications among trending OER topics and to collaborate with other regional compacts through activities. And as today, we are participating in a joint research project. Next slide, please. So SREB's strengths include research, data, publications, and convening of stakeholders to increase communication and collaboration. For the purpose of that activity, we have two very important things that I want to point out today. One, of course, is the joint research on OER and dual enrollment, leveraging open educational resources to expand equitable access, and hosting our regional conference. Save the date for February 24th and 25th. So in our effort and activities to achieve these outcomes, we have coordinated with MEC and several of the other three compacts to form the NCOER to increase awareness and share policies throughout our region and the nation. Thank you. Jenny?
Thank you, Charlotte. Well, I wanted to let you know that we've marked our calendars and we're going to be a part of that conversation and that meeting at the end of February. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so now I'm going to move on to introducing Jennifer Zinth, founder and principal of Zinth Consulting. She is our researcher on this project and many others historically in dual enrollment. I would say she's one of the leading experts in the nation. Her report that accompanies this webinar is called OER and Dual Enrollment, and this will be an overview of what you can expect when you access and read that paper. Jennifer?
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Next slide, please. Before we dive in, just a few intended outcomes of this project and a little point of clarification. I'll be using the term dual enrollment throughout as an umbrella term for college courses that are offered to high school students, regardless of course location, instructor type, or course modality. And I'm only saying that because I know in different states, dual enrollment can mean different things in terms of who's teaching the course where. But this report is really intended for multiple stakeholders, both state and local level OER stakeholders at the K-12 and post-secondary levels, as well as dual enrollment stakeholders, again, at the K-12 and post-secondary levels, and also both the state and local level, who either have not yet thought about the use of OER and dual enrollment, or who may have begun using OER and dual enrollment courses, but are looking to take their efforts to the next level. So this report is intended to inform these stakeholders on the potential challenges to equitable dual enrollment program access, participation, and success that the cost of traditional college textbooks can pose, and how OER can potentially mitigate those challenges, along with the current state policy landscape in terms of who's responsible for covering dual enrollment textbook costs, and a sort of how-to for integrating OER into dual enrollment courses, or taking OER integration in dual enrollment coursework to the next level. Next slide, please. And so turning now to the methodology that I used for developing this report. I started off by going into statutes, regs, state board policy documents, including dual enrollment policy manuals and guidelines in the 50 states and District of Columbia. And I also did a lot of email back and forth with agency and system staff to just really pin down who is responsible for textbook expenses. And oftentimes there'd be one person responsible for one type of program or course locale and a different entity responsible for another program within the same state. And then we did a call for interviews in early 2021 on the listservs operated by MEC, SRAB, and the Open Education Network. And from the folks who responded to that call for interviews, we honed it down to a total of 11 interviews with 19 state and local stakeholders. And with the SRAB interviews, we looked more at state or system level OER initiatives, including OER and dual enrollment. And with the MEC interviews, we included states in the Higher Learning Commission region, including Colorado, and did more of a focus on institution level initiatives. But you can see listed here the wide variety of people whose insights informed the development of this report, people who were involved in OER developments, implementation at the state and local level. Next slide, please. And so in terms of who in the states is responsible for covering dual enrollment textbook costs, you can see that there's quite a variety. And as I mentioned earlier, these numbers add up to more than 50 because a number of states have 2 or more programs and the entity responsible varies by program. And that, as I mentioned also, it can also vary by the post-secondary institution type. For example, in one state, it was a different responsibility depending on whether the student was taking a course through a community college or a 4-year institution, or in some states, depending upon whether the student was enrolled in a public school, a private school, or homeschool, the tuition or the textbook responsibility varied. And so you can see here that we found in 3 states, the state paid for textbooks. In 7, it was either the district or the student's secondary school. In 1 state, the post-secondary institution bore some responsibility. In 13 states, it was students or their families. In 16 states, it was a local decision. That means that state policy required that in the MOU or MOA between the K-12 and the post-secondary partner, that document had to specify which of these entities, either families, the post-secondary institution, the school district, someone else, maybe a foundation or a business partner, was responsible for those textbook costs. And then in the largest number of states, 20 states plus the District of Columbia, policy was silent. So it did not say anywhere in statute, reg, or that it was to be established through the local agreement between the K-12 and post-secondary partner. And with that said, as you can imagine, in the states in which the textbook responsibility is, or the cost of the textbooks is left to a local decision or a policy silent, there's the greatest potential for inequities in student access. So we could have in one district where students and their families bore no textbook cost, and another district over, it's entirely the responsibility of students and their families. And this can pose particular challenges, not just for low-income students, but also for under-resourced districts. If the district is responsible, they may need to pull back the number of courses or the seats in those courses available just because the difficulty of covering textbook costs. And there's also the possibility that because courses in STEM disciplines tend to have more expensive textbooks than textbooks in liberal arts courses, a district or another entity might need to pull back the number or seats in those courses to be able to cover those textbook costs. Next slide, please. And so I'm the kind of person, I hate to regurgitate what's in the report to an audience. So I'm trying to pull out a little bit from what was mentioned in the interviews, but didn't make its way for purposes of length into the final report. It was interesting that there were some state initiatives that were much more well established, and then there were some other state level initiatives that were quite new, just launched in 2021 and just now getting off the ground. We also found that across states, people commented that there were fewer OER, both courses and materials for CTE disciplines than for liberal arts. And with that said, there are some efforts underway in some states. For example, in Florida, the local college system is particularly interested in developing OER materials, not full-blown OER courses, but materials in early childhood education. And the Colorado Community College System just this year was awarded a grant to develop OER for the 8 CTE courses with the highest enrollments statewide of high school students. And so looking again at what can help state efforts, there are a whole assortment of ideas that interviewees mentioned. They said that one of them was that it's not necessary that you have just state level direction. It's not necessary that you have only grassroots support, but sometimes it can be helpful to have a little bit of a combination of both, where the state agency or legislation is providing some guidance and leadership. Maybe there's leadership from the governor's office, as well as bringing up that grassroots support, bringing along faculty, administrators, other institution level staff who can help with implementing these efforts on the ground. We also found in the interviews, many stakeholders commented on the importance of focusing the development of OER on the most impactful courses. In some states, this translated into courses that were the most commonly taken gen ed courses. In one state, it was looking at courses that were not just the most heavily accessed courses, but also those with the largest drop or withdrawal rates. They also commented on the importance of funding, and funding came for a variety of reasons: for faculty stipends, to cover faculty members' time outside their regular teaching load in order to make time for adapting and updating or developing OER. Some also commented on the importance of teacher stipends, where high school teachers were also involved in developing OER to cover that time that's spent outside the regular school day or school year. And stakeholders also commented on a variety of sources to offer this funding for faculty and teachers. One state mentioned that they were using Perkins grants to support teacher professional development or instructor professional development on using OER and CTE courses. Louisiana received a $2 million FIPSE grant from the US Department of Education that is supporting a 3-year initiative. And that's following on several years of having state agency funds, specifically Board of Regents funds, to support OER development and implementation efforts. And then some states, for example, Texas, have used legislative funds, most recently for a competitive grant program to support faculty and development integration and cross-institution communication around use of OER. And Texas is also using some federal CARES Act funding for OER projects, including but not limited to for dual enrollment courses. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Cohort approach. Many stakeholders commented on the importance of not just putting pairing up individual faculty with librarians or other instructional support at their institutions, but creating cross-institutional cohorts on a similar or same discipline or CTE area to support one another in a process of developing OER. Texas is one example of using state repositories. Georgia is another one to store OER courses and materials for use statewide. And then lastly, several stakeholders commented on the value of offering state level training to help institution embedded individuals be more effective advocates. One example is Colorado, that is creating an OER ambassadors program to train faculty, administrators, and other staff to go back to their campuses and help inform their peers on the use of OER and support implementation efforts. Next slide, please. And so turning now to the institution interviews, and this is my last slide for today. We learned a number of things. One of them is that it's critical to get the learning outcomes nailed down first before developing or approving OER, or if you're going to switch from one OER to another, updating those learning outcomes, and then, or if you're changing OER, realigning the learning outcomes to that new OER. Several stakeholders also expressed the importance of explaining the why behind the what when you're talking to faculty as well as to administrators and other institution staff, and on the need to clarify the potential OER benefits. Some faculty, for example, may be really wed to a certain textbook they've been using for a number of years, and it may need a little explanation to explain why this isn't losing academic freedom, but actually potentially gaining more academic freedom while also supporting student success. And a couple of great examples came from some interviews in Colorado. So for example, there was a business law professor who found that all the business law textbooks out there didn't fit the course that she had designed. And so she had the opportunity to use OER to enhance her academic freedom by developing her own course materials. She actually co-wrote the textbook with her students and then also pulled in some guest contributors from her days as a lawyer, judges, legal authorities, and so on. And so this OER business law textbook was the result of this effort. And she found that in using this and creating this OER textbook, her new course had become more rigorous. And at the same time, students experienced higher levels of engagement as well as academic performance in her course. And another example is Colorado State University, Pueblo, which is a Hispanic serving institution, has been using, one professor in particular I heard, is using OER to offer Spanish courses to heritage Spanish speakers who want to pursue Spanish in academic context. And this example was talking about matriculated students, but there's no reason why an institution couldn't use a similar example for high school students taking a college course, Spanish course. And so in this interview, this person noted that these students have different needs from students who are learning English as a second language. I'm learning Spanish as a second language, and this professor's OER embraces the students' experience as Spanish heritage learners. And is, again, as with the law professor, seen better student engagement as well as better student outcomes. And one of my favorite quotes from all of the interviews that I conducted was an individual who said, "Don't just tell faculty to swim in the ocean." This person commented that there are so many OERs out there, so many resources, so many courses, that it's really valuable to pair faculty with curriculum developers at their institution, librarians, some other staff, to help them curate various options out there, create some options for them and say, here are 5 options for your course. I think these might be good choices, and then you can choose as you wish for these various options. A number of stakeholders also commented on the value of high quality professional development and training for both faculty as well as high school teachers who are teaching college courses. Just one example was Baker College in Michigan, which has been using its Center for Teaching Excellence to put together trainings for faculty, both to help them know how most effectively to use and support students in using, how themselves to use OER, but how to support students in using OER. And the trainings also provide resources that faculty might draw from for their classrooms and training on how to use those resources. And then again, as with the state level interviews, institution level interviews commented on the value of sending staff and faculty to state or regional convenings, and that this kind of effort can empower local adoption and innovation, particularly because things can change so quickly in the digital world. So these kind of conferences can help people stay up to speed in their field. One example from Arapahoe Community College in Colorado was referencing this OER ambassador training that has been launched at the state level, which is both a train the trainer approach, but also helping faculty, administrators, and other staff message their peers on campus the benefits of OER. So thank you very much. With that, I'll turn it back to Jenny.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'm excited now to hear from the folks who have actually been doing this work on the ground. So I turn it over now to Paul Preimesberger. I think I got it right. If not, you'll have to correct me, Paul. The Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Success at Central Lakes College in Minnesota.
You got it right both times, Jenny. Well done. Yes. You may advance the slide. Yeah, and thanks, Jennifer, for that study. I've had a chance to kind of look through it a little bit. There really is a lot of great information collected from all over the country. So thanks, Jennifer, for putting that study together. There really is a lot of helpful suggestions, best practice strategies for folks who are thinking about beginning OER work at their college and or high school. Central Lakes College, just a quick background, we're a 2-year comprehensive community and tech college. We're part of the larger Minnesota state system. We're located in central Minnesota, and mostly our participating districts are small and rural districts. This was a 4-year project, so I worked for a period of 4 years with groups of high school teachers. Had about 16 different school districts that participated during that time, almost around 60 participants. The great majority of these were high school faculty, but in varying years also had several college faculty who participated as well. So sometimes I'd have groups that consisted of both high school and college faculty, and they'd actually be working together, let's say on a biology OER or an English OER. And sometimes it was just the high school students, teachers themselves. We ended up developing or curating OERs for 18 different dual enrollment courses. And in my particular case, when I say dual enrollment, I'm talking about college credit courses that are offered at the high school, not at the college. So these are college courses that high school teachers teach who are accredited to teach those courses. These courses represented about 10 different content areas. All were liberal arts courses. So certainly developing OERs for CTE content areas is a little bit more challenging, though now we do have a couple business teachers who are also pursuing OERs. In terms of how I kind of framed it, we had 5 to 6 meetings during the course of the academic year. Each was 3 hours apiece, and they were held during the school day. Actually, when to hold these meetings ended up being a very important question that we all wrestled with. And by that, I mean the instructors, superintendents, principals, because, you know, we could have held it after school, but the feeling among everybody kind of was that they weren't sure how engaged teachers would be after school, you know, after spending a whole day teaching. And of course, many teachers have after school obligations. So as we started to think about when to schedule it, it became pretty apparent that we needed to schedule them during the school day, making it easier for teachers to attend and also assuring that they still had some energy to do that. Next slide, please. The stipends were provided for each participant. And as I mentioned earlier, this was a grant funded project kind of through a regional service co-op, you know, that provides various resources and services to K-12 districts. They were provided for each participant. Note that although it was held during the school day, the stipends were really more for their after school research and review, because of course you don't want a double dip. So the stipends was made clear was for after school work and time. Also, I reimbursed the school districts for sub costs and mileage. That was actually very important too. The school districts, they were, you know, sometimes understandably reluctant to let go of these teachers for a day. So the fact that I was reimbursing them for sub costs and mileage was a nice benefit. And for some of our instructors too, they did have to travel. I think one traveled 2 hours each way. So the mileage over the course of a year did add up. So that was kind of a nice benefit that we could cover too. Jennifer mentioned about the professional development, and this really ended up being excellent professional development. Probably a lot of K-12 folks recognize the term PLC, or professional learning community, and that's really kind of what we had. So we would have a group of, let's say, chemistry teachers working together on a particular dual enrollment course. And because they were all from different schools, it really prevented discussions from going into classroom management or student behavior because they didn't have students in common. So they really were able to kind of focus more on the actual content and working on curating these OERs. Also, a large part of what we looked at were not just the OER themselves, but the technology to edit and revise these OERs. That was just as important as the content itself, because everybody was manipulating these OERs in various ways, and learning the technology that best suited that particular purpose was absolutely key. And so each meeting we would start with best practice strategies and sharing those. And a lot of time was spent on, hey, I found this particular piece of technology. It helped me edit in a really streamlined way. And teachers would usually be very receptive to that. And then finally, to engage their school district administration, we would have a last meeting, and that meeting would largely consist of each teacher from each district sharing what they thought was real benefits of OER and also what they found to be extremely challenging. And so it was a great way to kind of just enlighten and inform those school district administrators about what their teachers were doing, the great work they were doing, but if they wanted to take OER on their own, what they might expect, and expanding that to other teachers. Next slide. I can't remember if I have a next slide. Oh, I do. Yeah. Okay. Cost savings was obviously very important. In Minnesota, it was the school districts that saved money because they would purchase these books for their students. So they were very much interested in the cost savings that this would occur. I mentioned about that key question, when do you hold these meetings? And we found that holding it during the school day, during the school year worked very well for us. I also talked about those technology programs that are extremely important. Teachers have to be comfortable using those just as much as they might find material in OpenStax, because they will manipulate the material. They do need, I totally agree with that comment that Jennifer highlighted about don't just let them swim in the ocean. You got to give some guidance, but they also benefit from time to kind of independently explore the resources. I talked about the sharing best practices. That was always really beneficial. Most teachers come into this a little anxious about this new thing. And so that really helped kind of tamp them down a little bit, hear from other practitioners who were doing the work, hear about their benefits and challenges. So that was a real benefit. I mentioned that collaboration between high school and college faculty. And again, that really helped our college faculty understand that these high school courses were as rigorous as the courses that are taught at our college. So that was a benefit. And using dual enrollment kind of gave us a little bit of flexibility that you might not otherwise have. So for example, within a math department, if you were going to do a curriculum review, usually the whole math department kind of gets together, or representatives of it, and they all agree on what they're going to use. Because we were kind of a CIS course, a college in the schools course, we existed kind of independently within that department. That allowed those teachers to make decisions on their own about OERs and what materials they might want to use. So that was really helpful as well in terms of expediting the process. I think that's my last slide, so I will turn it back to Jenny.
Thank you, Paul. Well, you gave us a lot of really good tactical advice, and you're right. So much about working with everyone matters about how accessible is it time-wise and energy-wise, but I particularly feel that for teachers as we talk about so many of the challenges of that position and all that we are asking of them all the time. So thank you for highlighting and emphasizing that. All right, now we're going to hear from Zachary Adams, the Director of Postsecondary Coordination and Alignment for the Tennessee Board of Regents. Zachary.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. Would you please advance to the next slide? So today I'm going to be talking about our efforts, our statewide effort to introduce OER to a program called Statewide Dual Credit. Most folks this afternoon have been using the term dual enrollment. In Tennessee, we like to create little niches for each one of these terms. So I want to go over those quickly before we get started. I'm going to be talking today about statewide dual credit, which is a program that is legislatively mandated here in the state. These are courses developed by teams of college faculty that the Board of Regents recruits from both public and private institutions, 2-year and 4-year institutions, to create courses that are then taught by high school teachers. At the end of the school year, students sit for a challenge exam, and if they receive a score higher than the cut score set by those teams of faculty, they earn college credit that can articulate to any public 2-year or 4-year institution in the state of Tennessee, and at many private Tennessee colleges and universities as well. Dual enrollment in Tennessee are courses that are taught by faculty members who meet the accreditation requirements for teaching at the post-secondary level. And college credit is earned if a student passes the course. Next slide, please. So the statewide dual credit program currently serves just under 40,000 high school students per year. We have 11 different courses. It is a mixture of both CTE and sort of general education coursework, ranging anything from statewide dual credit sociology or statewide dual credit psychology to statewide dual credit introduction to business, statewide dual credit plant science. You'll see here some of our outcomes, which will lead me into why we started to move into and think about OER as a strategy for this statewide program. So last year, only 6% of those 38,000 students banked college credit. While it represents an over $2.5 million cost savings to students, and it represents over 100% return on the state's investment in dual credit, it still is a low pass rate and something that we're concerned about. Next slide, please. So we began to look at OER as a strategy to both support teachers and students in the statewide dual credit program. Across all of our courses over the last 5 to 7 years that they've been in implementation, we've seen persistently low pass rates. We also were very aware that a lot of the growth, the exponential growth that we saw in our statewide dual credit program was being driven by smaller, more rural districts. And those districts are usually the ones that are dealing with resource constraints and cannot purchase a textbook for a group of students who are in a statewide dual credit course. And so they were opting to use just the same American history textbook that they would use for their regular or the same textbook for their regular high school course as the statewide dual credit course. And so there were concerns about both the rigor of that text and alignment with the challenge exam at the end of the course. Next slide, please. So here you can see just visually both the exponential growth represented by the red line in our statewide dual credit program, growing from a humble beginning of just several hundred students back in the 13-14 school year to now serving almost 40,000 students statewide. And as you can see, that persistently low pass rate across all courses is consistent and something that we are trying to address through better supports for teachers and students. And one of those strategies for us has been OER. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the process of selecting an OER, supporting college faculty as they redesign the course, and then what support we provided to high school teachers as they implemented these OER for the first time this school year. So our efforts first focused on recruiting faculty. And this process is an open call to all of the state's public and private institutions. Some of the screening criteria include teaching dual enrollment courses, having taught at the high school level before, teaching aligned courses to the dual credit course. And our charge to those faculty were to first compare the existing learning objectives and identify which objectives may need to be revised or updated to match any changes in the field or changes to the ways in which they teach at the university level. We then ask those faculty to select an OER text. Once they had selected that textbook, we provided support and guidance around ensuring that the OER text they had selected aligned to the learning objectives they had written. And so we wanted to ensure at that foundational level from the start that faculty, the learning objectives created by the faculty for the course were aligned to that text. And so what that does is it allows high school teachers to really rely on that OER text as their foundational curriculum resource as they're developing their pacing guides or their curriculum map for the school year. We then instructed and supported our faculty teams to use the OER to revise and update the exam banks that that are used to generate the challenge exams at the end of the course. And so what this did was create a sort of seamless alignment between the course development, the resources that were provided for teachers to develop their curriculum, and then created confidence in both teachers and students that as they prepared for the challenge exam, that what they used in the OER was going to show up. The way that concepts were presented, the way that key terms were defined would align between the OER and the challenge exam. Ultimately, we want as many students as possible to be banking college credit through our statewide dual credit program. And so that alignment between the OER text and the exam was really crucial for us. And so a part of our program is also K-12 teacher training. And we knew that the use of OER was spotty at best across the state. And so there was a need to provide really foundational level training to high school teachers to compare and contrast a traditional textbook to an OER textbook. And so that's the training that we provided for them, providing them key differences between those two types of texts, and then how they could leverage the access of an OER for both their curriculum and lesson planning, whether that be for creating student activities, downloading parts of the text, copying parts of the text, distributing that to students without worry, was a really important first step. We are in year one of this program, and so we will be looking to our high school teachers for feedback on what supports they will need moving forward for these courses. I think next and final slide, please. Here's what we've learned. High school teachers have very positively received the addition of a comprehensive foundational text for the course. Not only, and I think that stems from two places. The first, that they have a text that they can rely on for curriculum planning, and that they can provide to students a comprehensive resource that's truly going to help prepare them for that challenge exam. We also learned that not all of our content areas had a comprehensive OER text. And so we had a spin-off project that's currently underway, where we are developing what we believe is the first ever plant science OER for our STC plant science course, and a world history OER that is inclusive of all cultures, not just Western civilization. So the feedback that we've received from our world history college faculty was that all of the OER world history texts on the market are too Western civ focused. And so they are developing a new OER that is more inclusive of other cultures. As I mentioned, these texts were implemented this year, and so we'll begin to see early impacts on student success when they test in this December, if they're on a block schedule, or in May, if they're on a traditional schedule at their high school. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny.
Thank you, Zachary. Well, we have arrived at the part of our presentation when we can answer questions, and we have quite a lot of them. And honestly, I do not know a lot of the answers to this, so I'm going to need to turn this over to an array of the folks who are supporting this and presenting here today. So I'll get started. I'll read some of these questions and let you guys answer them. So one of the questions is, did the research show any examples of states where OER use for dual enrollment started at the secondary level and not at the post-secondary side of things? For example, can high school districts and high school instructors be leaders in this kind of work?
I'll jump in. No, I did not see any examples of that. We did see examples where a high school, like in Paul's example, would partner with a college, but it was typically OER developed by the college or at the state level for use in high school courses. And actually, a couple of the regional accreditors in particular, HLC being one of them, and SACS, do have statements about learning outcomes for courses offered to high school students needing to be identical to those for on-campus offerings. And so using the same textbook, regardless of whether it's OER or a traditional textbook, helps ensure that the same learning outcomes are met.
Thank you. Here's one for Paul. Where would individuals at a district interested in looking at OERs developed through your project look?
I think the best way would be just to email me, and then I can contact the appropriate teachers and send the appropriate link. So my email is my first name dot last name at clcmn.edu.
All right. Here's a broader one. Is there a database that can provide samples of other OERs that for typical dual credit courses?
I'll just jump in and say that Tennessee is developing a repository of OER. It's being led by Dr. Robert Den at the Tennessee Board of Regents, and currently we've had 2 cohorts of faculty teams develop OER specifically for our college courses. But as Jennifer mentioned, many of the college courses are aligned with the dual enrollment courses, and so those textbooks do align. It is the Tennessee. I'll drop a link in the chat, but that repository would be a great place to start.
Great, thank you. Another participant asks, I'm curious to know if the on-campus classes at Minnesota and Tennessee are also using the same OER. To meet the NACEP standards, high school teachers and post-secondary faculty should be using the same textbooks. Is NACEP willing to budge on this to make dual enrollment ops more equitable and accessible?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. We had the benefit of actually having a lot of our college courses that were CIS courses going through OER. So that's why we were able to get some faculty involvement there. But if that wasn't the case, then we always made sure that the faculty here approved the OER that was being curated by the particular high school's teacher, and that it met the same standard. So it didn't have to be exactly alike, but it had to make sure that it met the same learning outcomes as the college course.
And I'm going to tell for this particular question, we can certainly always try to loop back with Amy Williams at NACEP and find out, if they have any additional guidance or recommendations with this. This one's for Zachary. How is your statewide dual credit different from your advanced placement courses?
The analogy that I use frequently is that statewide dual credit is Tennessee's version of advanced placement. And so we are managing everything from course creation through test administration. And one of the advantages of statewide dual credit is that it's completely free to both schools and students. So there's no fee associated with the exam. And I'll also just add that we encourage districts to diversify their portfolio of what we call early post-secondary opportunities. So we'd love for them to include both AP and statewide dual credit and dual enrollment and international baccalaureate courses into their portfolio of courses provided to students.
Thank you. And then we have another one this is coming from a great OER advocate down in Florida, Rebel Cummings Saw. And she says that Canada has some great K-12 OER advocates. If you are interested, she has placed a link into the chat so that everyone can see it. So that's another great resource that adds to this conversation. Oh, and then there's someone who says, no, it leads to a password window. Oh, well, okay. We will, and people are saying we'd love to get to know the K-12 advocates. Okay, duly noted. We'll work on that as kind of a follow-up to this. We can certainly reach out to those folks in Canada and orchestrate a set of conversations. All right, okay. Those are the questions from the chat. Charlotte, would you like to help or present some of the questions from the Q&A?
Sure, Jenny. Our first question comes up from Dan McGuire. In what format does OER mostly exist? Word docs, PDFs, Pressbooks, full LMS courses? Any of our panelists can jump right in.
I think it, at least I found, I think it kind of runs the gamut. And then, like I said, when our teachers were working with, frequently they'd work with an existing OER, right? And then they would kind of cherry pick that for their own needs, reorder things. And WordPress was certainly one of the programs that some of the teachers used, but some teachers use different programs too.
Mary, I believe, wants to chime in. Mary? Okay. So our next question, what platform do you use, Pressbooks or something else? I believe that was for, I believe it was for Zachary. Was it for Zachary?
Sure. For the textbooks that we're developing in plant science and world history, we're using open author through OER Commons. And then the other statewide dual credit courses, like Intro to Business, for instance, is using the OpenStax textbook. If faculty aren't developing an OER and they select one that's already out in the universe, it can come from any number of existing sources, but the ones that we're currently creating are through open author.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, did you study the role of print and the role it plays in OER and dual enrollment courses? And is there greater importance for print in the context of the high school students, or is digital now the norm? And how are colleges and schools providing print or print options for high school students? Zachary? Was that a question for Paul?
Jennifer, you can go ahead. Why don't you go ahead?
Actually, they sound like there are a few questions bundled in there. My interview protocol did not ask that specific question, but some of the interviewees did indicate that students did feel fairly comfortable with using online text, and it was more the either high school teachers or the faculty who had a little bit more of a learning curve in using OER. All that said, some interviewees said specifically that students benefited from some explicit guidance on, for example, annotation. And so training teachers or faculty how to help students annotate in an OER, or note-taking, and some interviewees also commented that some faculty would end up, because of bandwidth issues or other issues in students' homes or being able to access the OER outside of the school day, they would end up printing the OER, but that would be at a minimal cost compared to a traditional textbook.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Jen.
oh,
I'm
I was just
sorry, go
gonna-
ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Jennifer said. A lot of our high school teachers who were working on our project did end up printing either all or a portion of the OERs. Like I said, we're in a rural area, so sometimes some of their students were challenged with bandwidth issues or not being able to access online. So in that case, they would print those out, or they might print out a particular unit of the OER or something like that. But as Jennifer said, the cost of printing that with a decent binder were far less than traditional textbook.
Jenny, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm not on this particular question, but I had another one come up in chat that was interesting. So Zachary, did you have anything to add about the issue of print?
I would just echo what Paul said, that it was really important for us that high school teachers, particularly in rural districts and places with a lack of access to broadband, that they could download the OER as a PDF. Most districts have our one-to-one devices, especially with a lot of the recovery funds coming from USDOE, but Wi-Fi access is still an issue. And so being able to have that PDF on their Chromebook when they go home, is when students go home, was an important feature that we thought was necessary.
Great. So the question that came up in the chat, since you've been asking questions from Q&A, Charlotte, is, I have used an OER for a college level online statistics course. The one issue I had that I ran into between teaching the course the first and second time was that there were some slight changes which threw off the content by 10 to 15 pages. Yet I, as the user, did not know that changes had been made. Have either of you proactively dealt with how you are going to keep users informed of such edits and changes? And I would say that is not unique to the dual enrollment setting. Keeping up with the iterations of OER and how it changes is actually an entire field unto itself. But I wondered if that has come up in any of the interviews, Jennifer or Paul and Zachary, if it's come up for any of your instructors.
I didn't hear it.
One of the unique features of statewide dual credit is that challenge exam. And so the text, teachers can't modify the text, at least for their statewide dual credit course. If they planned on using it for their regular high school American history course, they certainly could. Or if they were a dual enrollment instructor creating their own end of course exam, they could make those edits. So it's not something that we necessarily have to worry about with statewide dual credit, because that challenge exam stays the same for a 3-year period before we reconvene faculty to discuss any updates to the course as a whole.
And we did have a few issues like that, where an instructor might be looking at a biology OER, and even in the span of a month, they return to it. Oops, something's different. But they really ended up kind of developing their own, in the sense of, kind of like I said, cherry picking resources from different OERs. But it is something that kind of requires consistent curation. You kind of got to keep an eye on that thing once you get it going.
Right. A couple of folks have chimed in that the beauty of OER is that you have control over edits much more than you do over traditional text, because you have the ability to download the version that you like and preserve that version for your students. You just would need to choose the platform on which you want to download it and deliver it to your students. Another person has said, yes, we use versioning in repository or Pressbooks to take care of these things. So a lot of good ideas there, and we can certainly, if you reach out to us, get you connected with other resources and training for that. So I will turn it back to you, Charlotte. I think we have time for one more question. What we will do with the remaining questions is try to get you some answers from our panelists and include that with some of the with some of the feedback that we will be presenting to you guys tomorrow in an email.
Well, for our last question, I'd like to go to our researcher, Jennifer Zinth. This question is, did the research show any examples in which states or OER use started at the secondary level and not the post-secondary side?
We didn't find any examples of that. It was in every case except for Paul, as he talked about partnering between K-12 and post-secondary, where it would start out at the institution or at a post-secondary agency. And it was the same materials offered for regularly matriculated students and high school students taking that course.
Okay. Well, Jenny, I believe you have a plan for responding to the additional Q&A.
We
Back to
do.
you.
We're gonna print out. Well, we're gonna save this chat, save the Q&A, make sure that we have the additional questions answered, and we will include that in the information that we will send out to participants tomorrow. I thank you all for being here. What a great presentation. This is obviously a super hot topic. And MEC will keep working in this area hand in hand with SREB. And I will just let you know that SREB has a number of webinars, publications, and events that pertain to the use of OER in a dual enrollment setting. So keep an eye on them, go to their website, and look for the things that Charlotte is out there doing every day. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.